3 higher ed authors, 100 plus college and university presidents, dozens of actionable insights for academic leaders. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education, is now available on Amazon. Welcome back, everybody. It's your time to EdUp on the EdUp Experience podcast, where we make education your business. My name, as you know, because I've said it 630-something times, is Dr. Joe Salustio, and we're going to continue on and do this forever. And I say this lovingly to my co-founder, Elvin of EdUp, Elvin Freitas, who has me booked out recording every day now till September. Every day until September. That's a lot of great conversations we're going to have. And, you know, we took the first 125 presidents we interviewed on this podcast and we put them all in a book called Commencement, the Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, that's available on Amazon. You can pick it up. Thousands of people have already. And I am honored and blessed when I can take one of those 125 presidents and bring them back to the microphone and put them on the other side of the conversation so that they're drilling the guest instead of getting drilled themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most esteemed presidents ever in the world. Here she is. She's Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, President Emerita at Spelman College. Mary, what is up?
Thanks so much, Joe. It's great to be here. I'm sitting here in Big Sky, Montana, and it's wonderful to be here with you and our special guest today.
Oh my gosh, Big Sky, Montana, huh?
Yeah.
Is that what happens when you retire? You just go get some land and enjoy?
Absolutely.
But you said you were busy in retirement, so that's not totally true, is it?
No, it's not. Everybody assumes that since you're retired, you have all this free time on your hands, right? So you get a lot of invitations to do a lot of different things. But when you called me to do this, I said, absolutely, yes.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. And by the way, for our guest who I'm going to introduce in a second, we sent Mary, who, by the way, needs no introduction if you know higher ed at all. We sent her a list of guests and we said, who would you like to talk to on this list? And there were like 70 guests on that list, right, Mary? There was a lot of people on that list.
A lot of people.
And a lot of really awesome people. And She said this one to talk to this gentleman right here. No pressure. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. His name is Chike Aguh, and he is former Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor. Chike, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Good. Do you feel any different with that whole setup that you know you're selected from this long list of people? Is there any more pressure?
When I used to work for Mayor Bloomberg, he had a legendary admonition he gave to every commissioner that he had. He would, before he would introduce you to the press, he would say, you know, we believe in you, we look forward, and then he would pull you in very tight and he would say, don't F it up. Yikes. And so I feel like I can hear him in my ear right now with that big wind up, and I hope I don't disappoint.
Oh, I don't think you will. This, Mary and I were talking beforehand. We said, this job of Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor is a newer type appointment, is it not? Can you tell us a little bit about the history of that appointment and why it was such an honor for you to serve?
So the history of this job is I am the second Chief Innovation Officer, or I was at the Department of Labor. A good friend of mine, Javier Hughes, was the first. This job was created in the Obama administration by the Deputy Secretary of Labor at that time, a man named Seth Harris, who has become a dear friend. And the job, I'll be honest, very simply, early on was, let's do better, go faster, go bolder on how we deliver for the American worker and all the parts of the economy that depend on that worker. That was everything from using technology to reform our business processes. That was everything to working with different companies who are in the innovation sector. And so my predecessor, he did that job for almost 6 years, the last 6 years of the Obama administration. In the intervening administration, that job was unfilled. And I'll leave that there. And then I was appointed on day one of the of this administration. And I'll say, and I always tell the story, I got the call for this job on January 7th, 2021. So
which is a very interesting day.
Yep. And for those of you who know the Department of Labor and where it is in DC, it is right behind the Capitol. So literally my colleagues the day before were locked down for 10 hours on the roof watching what was watching the insurrection that transpired. And then also remember at that time, we were still in the thick of the pandemic. We had just started to roll out vaccines. My wife, who's a physician, had gotten one of the first vaccines a month beforehand. We didn't quite know if it even really worked at that point. And then of course, the economy at that point was in a variety of free fall. So anyway, when I went to tell my wife I got the call, she said, "Are you sure you want to take this job?" And she asked it a little tongue in cheek, but it was a no-brainer. The other things I'll say were interesting were the way that an administration works, that you've not served in one, is it's weird. The most senior people come last because they have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And so when I arrived on day one, Joe Biden was sworn in at 12 o'clock. I was sworn in at 2:20. I was told to have my laptop on by 3. My boss, the Deputy Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, who's now the nominee to be Secretary, who I cannot speak highly enough as a human being and as a leader, she didn't arrive for 6 months. So for 6 months, I was kind of saying, let me do what I think should be done. And so
really?
The way I framed my job was I said, look, my job is to think through how we use most innovative data, technology, and practice to advance the American worker. And also, how do we think about the effect of those innovations and technologies on those same workers? And my job was to be that kind of principal SME and advisor to the Deputy Secretary and Secretary on those issues. So, the reason that you asked me, last part of your question, which is why was it such an honor? And I tell this story and Dr. Schmidt-Campbell, you've heard this story. I am the first person in the entire history of my family born in America. My family is from a far and out of the way village in Nigeria that most Nigerians themselves will never see or never visit. My grandparents didn't go past middle school. My parents grew up on streets that were unpaved then, they're unpaved now. And they got to come to America because they got golden tickets to come to American public universities. My dad went to UT in Texas. My mom went to Rutgers in Jersey. And I remember, actually, I just got my letter from the White House thanking me for my service. And I sent a picture of it to my mom, and she said, I never thought anyone related to me would even set foot in a place like that. All we wanted when we came here was we wanted you guys to not struggle the way that we did. We wanted you to go to school, get a good job, take care of your family. That was all they knew to dream about. And so that's why it was such an honor beyond all the things that come with working for a president, working for a secretary. And so I would do it 10 times over. I will say my family's probably happy to have me around. My kids are getting reoriented to what my face looks like.
Yeah, I bet.
Go ahead.
No, I said, I bet they're glad to have you home. The demands of the job are plenty, I am sure.
I mean, I'll tell you, I was here. I was sworn in about 3 feet that way. You can find video of it online, but I would do it again. But definitely, the family serves with you, and that's kind of what doesn't get told a lot. My wife, my 2 kids, my baby girl who was born during COVID, my son who was 3 when I started this job. Now he's 6, and so it's a family effort, definitely, and I can't thank them enough.
Chike, I have to say that you and I have a couple of things in common. You just said you served in the Bloomberg administration, right? Well, I served a couple of mayors in New York City government as well, but a long time ago. Ed Koch and David Dinkins.
A fan of one, not so much of the other. I'll leave that be.
But also, as you know, I heard you give an absolutely wonderful, inspirational speech to the MBA graduates at Wharton. So I know a little bit about some of the things that you were trying to accomplish during your tenure as the Chief Innovation Officer. But I want to go back a minute and ask you, how would you define innovation? That's right. Question number 1. And number 2, how do we begin to open up the landscape of innovation such that it becomes much more diverse than it is today?
Let me give you, this is a great question. This is actually the question that so for the first 2 weeks when I got there, because I had no boss, I had the fortunate ability to talk to everyone who I was coming into the department with. And I would usually ask 2 questions. Tell me what's most important to you in terms of what you're trying to accomplish and how can I be helpful? And everyone would ask me this question. And the way that I defined it, this is not my definition. This came from an old boss I had named Jim Shelton, who was basically me at the Department of Education about 15 years ago when I was his intern.
Not Jim Shelton.
Jim Shelton, now a Blue Meridian, who's a dear friend.
Yeah, right, I know him well.
He's a dear friend. But this is the definition he gave me, and I've held on to. Innovation is a new way of doing something done at scale for a purpose. I'll say it again. A new way of doing something done at scale for a purpose. And each part of that is really important. A new way of doing something. Maybe it's, and it might be an old way of doing something in another space that you bring to a space to which that thing is new. Done at scale, meaning it's not just the thing you do one time. That's just an invention. It's got to be able to be repeated. And then lastly, for a purpose. One thing that is a danger in jobs like the one that I had is you can just chase shiny stuff. That's fun. But the question is, for what purpose? And generally, when I was at my best, it was less about talking about the innovation. It was more about what is the thing we are trying to accomplish. I came in on day one of this administration because of the unemployment insurance system. That's why I was brought in that, because the unemployment insurance system in many ways performed admirably. We gave $850 billion of unemployment insurance benefits to 1/3 of the American workforce. Probably one of the largest income transfers in the history of our species. On the other hand, it failed in a lot of ways. In my home state of Maryland, we had people who applied for checks in 2020 who didn't see a check till 2022 because the system was overwhelmed. If you looked at the Black workers versus white workers in terms of who got checks, who was more accepted and confirmed for their payments, huge disparities. And then also we had integrity issues. We actually had criminal actors in places like Eastern Europe who were impersonating Americans and stealing money that should have gone to hardworking Americans. And so so when I talk about innovation in that space, it's less about what shiny new API can we come up with to make this easier. It's about, does a family wants to stay in their house who needs a check? Does a family want to get their groceries? So on and so forth. The question that you asked, which is now, how do we make this more diverse? And this is the thing that I said, and before my time in the administration, spent a lot of time in the private sector, corporate strategy, product development, things like that. And particularly if you spend time with anyone in the technology space who's built a product, the first thing you say is, what is the problem of the customer? And I would argue that we need to expand who the customer is in many places. I spent a short time as a venture capitalist, and I've said, I'm going to be honest, if I see another product built for people, frankly, who are on the Upper West Side of New York, or in Sunnyvale in California, or in Cambridge, Massachusetts, people who frankly are doing okay, you're missing a huge opportunity. I think about
nailed it
in my home state, in the east and west side of Baltimore, in my home county of Prince George's, in the Inner Beltway, who are struggling with a number of maladies. Those are the people that we need to focus on, and to me, that's how we expand. And once you focus on that customer, you then focus on, all right, here's who I'm building for, who is doing the building. And you realize quickly, oh, shoot, those people more people should look kind of like the customer, whether that be from an income point of view, an ethnicity point of view, from a geography point of view. And so to me, I actually think if you apply the best lessons from product development, meaning put the customer first, expand that definition to include all the communities that we've overlooked and underserved for a long time, and then you create people to build for them who look like them, you begin to get to, I think, what you're talking about, which is an innovation class in America that looks like America.
Excellent.
I love it. Let's switch to higher ed just for a second, because when we talk U.S. Department of Labor, we talk innovation, I think jobs, right? When we're talking even equity, we're talking generational wealth and building and jobs, money, the ability to earn a living wage and save and pass it down to your kids. There's just so many things. And higher education for hundreds of years has been a vehicle for students who aspire for a better job or to earn money to go and get a degree. And now we're in a time of change for colleges and universities. We have many of them. Some are failing. Some are underfunded. Some are, frankly, unable to maneuver in change because higher ed has a lot of bureaucracy, probably like the government in some ways, right? Because they're like mini cities and mini governments. When you look at universities, where are we failing most often when it comes to preparing students for the future of work? That is one of the questions we're dealing with.
I see we're asking easy questions today.
Yeah, well, Mary gave me that, and she said, I didn't feel comfortable asking you. Can you ask it? I was like, sure, Mary.
No, so let me say a couple things first. Higher ed means a lot to me. Obviously, you've heard my personal background. Also, the Department of Labor is actually one of the biggest funders of higher education in America. Mm-hmm. We fund over 3,000 institutions per year to do workforce development through the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act programs, things like that. And in many states, actually, higher ed is the biggest workforce developer. I'll use my home state of Maryland. the biggest giver of credentials in the workforce space in Maryland is the University of Maryland Global Campus, which is right down the road from me. Greg Fowler.
Isn't that Gregory Fowler?
Yes.
One of my favorites.
And then thirdly, I'm actually, as of 2 weeks from now, I'll be an appointee to the Maryland Higher Education Commission via Governor Moore. And so this is top of mind for me. Let me say a couple of things that I think are big challenges that I don't know if higher education has tackled. I think first is if I am someone who is trying to get a better job or who's lost their job and trying to get to a job, these distinctions between higher education, workforce development providers are meaningless. I'm just trying to go somewhere to figure out what I need to know to get into a job. But as you all know, the lines between quote unquote higher education, quote unquote, and all these other folks who also help people get skills are really, really opaque. And they frankly only matter to us, to the worker, to the person who's trying to do better in their lives. We need to have a no wrong door approach. We need to make for the worker, the lines as porous as possible. And honestly, the folks who I find do this best are actually community colleges.
Yep. Because
they really are at this seam of higher education and workforce. There are challenges there, but that's number one. The silos are held too tightly, and that don't know how to work. So that's number one. I think secondly, the world of higher education and the world of work don't know enough about each other. They just don't. Whether that be things like generative AI and prompt engineering, which is a really entirely new job that didn't exist even a year ago, all the way to the basics of, I was the liaison to the National Space Council when I was at the Department of Labor, really because no one else was free and I could go to the meetings. But I remember what we put forward to the vice president who chairs that council was we said we need to create a strategy to fill all these open jobs at SpaceX, at Blue Origin, at Boeing, at Lockheed. And these aren't crazy jobs. This is welding. This is being an electrician, machinist, non-destructive testers. These are jobs that actually don't require a 4-year college degree, but I am unclear how many institutions are fully aware of that scope. And then do they fully understand the firms that these folks are going to go to and have the relationships? Third piece, which is actually not on higher education's fault, but they need to figure it out. The private sector has a hard time recognizing all the talent within the economy that can do the job. They are used to, I asked for a college degree because it's really easy for me to figure it out. What you've heard this push on as is hiring for skills versus hiring for pedigree. The challenge is, and I always remember this example, in New York City, through the leadership of Jamie Dimon and a bunch of folks, created the New York CEO Jobs Council. Let's fill 100,000 jobs with Black and brown New Yorkers that are well-paying that we need filled. When they began to do the analysis, what they found was, all right, we fill out a lot of these jobs through internships. Well, where are these folks coming from? They're coming from Columbia, from NYU. They're not coming from CUNY. They're not coming from all these other places where, frankly, the majority of New Yorkers who are in higher education are. So the pathways from higher education to work, the private sector has not totally figured out how to optimize those. The higher ed needs to help them and push them to make sure that they are as open as possible. So those are our three big challenges. I think one, the silos. Secondly, understanding truly what the economy needs, not at a certain level, but a granular level. And then lastly, how do you help industry not erect barriers to the folks that you all are serving? So let me stop there.
Right. I was so happy to hear you mention UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, because our good friend, Freeman Hrabowski, has
a legend here.
A legend everywhere.
We claim him here in Maryland, but absolutely.
A president for 30 years, I think.
Absolutely.
He was here. And I am proud to say he was a mentor to me and a lot of other members in my family. But I point them out because I think he understood that very, very well in terms of multiple. It was never either or, it was yes and. Yes. And quite frankly, I shamelessly, as the president of Spelman, followed his lead. So, for example, while we put a lot of energy into cultivating an incredibly successful innovation lab that ultimately had an HBCU game jam and went into the 3,000 high schools and did a lot of other great things. We also had an online adult learning opportunity. And there's no reason why colleges and universities, certainly Arizona State or Southern New Hampshire, have recognized this as well. So there are some innovative, to use the word.
Oh, absolutely.
That are not making the distinction. They're doing both. In terms of workforce development, I could not agree with you more. What I found when I came into the HBCU community is that many of our young people coming in have not a clue about the possibilities of jobs. They know doctor, lawyer, teacher, social worker, et cetera. And part of the educational process has to be to actually inform our students even of an entire universe of work that's out there. And now, all across the country, several colleges and universities are actually having mandatory sessions for students to understand what the workplace is about. We did a required course in your sophomore year at Spelman's, 1 credit, to really do a deep dive on what it is to be in the workplace. And finally, for some of these new, technology is always changing, right? So a college degree is not going to certify you for a job 5 years from now. But what we have to do is begin that aggressive partnership. So IBM comes in and gives us funds a faculty member to teach quantum computing. We don't have the capacity, to do that. Google sends a Googler to be on our computer science faculty. But there are many, many creative ways innovative ways that we can spark really, to Joe's point, a real change in the way higher education works that really speaks to all three of your absolutely on point points.
I think it's we speak in generalities. There are these innovators, whether it be a SNU, whether it be, honestly, I actually think, whether it be the minority serving college community, I think about Haskell College, which is a Native American serving institution, which we got to work with at the Department of Labor, doing amazing work because they have to, because they're serving the folks who are most in need, our HBCUs, our Hispanic serving institutions, and our community colleges. My good friend Rachel Lipson, who just helped write the book Americans' Hidden Economic Engines, which are case studies of some of these most innovative colleges. There are these islands, and they've done it because they've had to. And I've actually said, for some of the quote unquote fancier schools, there's something that they could learn from the folks who are really serving the majority of American undergraduates, and not just undergraduates, but also all these folks who, if you go to most community colleges, the fastest growing part of their population is actually folks who are doing non-credit bearing courses. They are getting certifications. For Prince George's Community College, for example, that is absolutely true. And so there's this other now newer population within a lot of American higher education. UMGC at University of Maryland is experiencing something similar. So how do we take advantage of that? And that's how we begin to get to, I think, this underlying equity theme that you've said here. That's how we serve more people who need to be served, and not simply have higher education at its worst be kind of a perpetuator of inequality. You have to do what you're talking about now. We actually are closing a bunch of those gaps.
You know that the world of higher education is experiencing evolutions and revolutions. You want to be part of the progress. Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education with insights from more than 100 college and university presidents, will show you how. Get your copy of Commencement, the beginning of a new era in higher education now on Amazon right away. We think you're going to love it. It's
And we get better. I mean, there's the equity aspect of diversity, essential, but there's also the excellence part of diversity.
Correct.
I mean, the study after study has shown that, yes, at first, if you have homogeneity, things go pretty smoothly. And when you start bringing in diversity, you may have a few humps to reconcile, but once you get through those, then you expand exponentially. And so I think we should always keep the excellence and merit part of closely linked to diversity.
Let me make one other point, which is, and I think that's from a macroeconomic perspective. So I worked in the administration for almost 2.5 years. I probably met with almost 50 C-suite teams from the Fortune 2000, from CHROs to CEOs, and they all had the same question, which is, hey, our business is generally doing well. In fact, it's doing so well that I do not know where all the workers will come from to fill all these jobs. Help us, please. And and I've told the story before, when someone would ask me that, I would usually ask them two questions. It's the same question that my wife asks me when I'm looking for my keys in the morning and I can't find them. And I'm on my hands and knees looking. She'll ask me, what are you looking for and where have you looked?
Nailed it.
Usually answer the questions for them and say, if the people you needed were in the places you always looked, you wouldn't be here. Therefore, you need to look in newer communities, in different places, because mathematically you have no other choice. And so I think higher education has an opportunity right now to help industry fill these gaps. I don't care if it's infrastructure. I don't care if it's green tech. I don't care if it's semiconductor fabrication, space. The analysis that we had in the administration was that there were 300,000 private sector jobs in the space industry between now and 2030, because we have to build 4 or 5 rockets bigger than the Saturn V to do what NASA wants to do, let alone what the private sector wants to do, just in that one industry. Higher ed can step in here. And one of the things that I've said, which is always one of the challenges, is, okay, for higher ed, how do we pay for all this without putting it on the back of the student? And my clear answer has always been, be so good at solving that problem, meaning the talent problem for industry, they will pay you. And that's, to me, the virtual circle that we need to solve. Now, it requires higher ed to be amazing at that. But if they are, and they're amazing reliably, that unlocks an entirely different business model. And it's not trivial, it's not easy, but to me, that's how we begin to solve some of these long-term issues. Because that's, when I've had these conversations with higher ed leaders, that's always one of the challenges. How do I pay for this? How do I take the single mom from Temple Hills, Maryland, who wants to get a better job, who needs money for childcare, for transportation, for all these other supports, while she may not be able to work, while she takes these courses? How do I pay for that support? Because you have to. And the answer is, to me, you got to have a private people that are willing to pay huge margins for.
Let me ask this, because you guys are hitting on what I think is one of the most important and confusing things that a student has to work through. And I've asked this before, and then I go back and I listen and I go, ask the same questions over and over again sometimes, but I get new guests that have new perspectives and they're really good questions. But the Credential Engine, if you don't know them, they log.
Know them well.
Yeah, there's 1.3 million credentials. Okay, and then you've got higher ed, who has lots of structure, which people understand, right? You understand, we all understand it. There's associate degrees and bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, doctoral degrees, so on and so on. Credential Engine has non-credit certificates that are 1 week and 4 weeks and 44 weeks and 23 weeks. And how do I know as a student, and I'm relating this back to the equity piece here. Maybe I'm coming from a lower economic background. I'm a first-gen student. My parents have no idea about college. And here I am trying to navigate, do I go to college or do I listen to all of this going on around me that I don't need to go to college? I can just get this credential and I'm going to get a job. What is that doing to the future of families if we are, or some students are convinced that college may not be the right path? Now, I'm not arguing for or against college, but I'm arguing for the lack of understanding around credentials. And not just from the student perspective, but from the employer perspective. They might look through a list of these. I always joke that my cousin Vinny, one of my favorite movies, my cousin Vinny has a real estate course and non-credit credential. What is that doing for me with this job I'm going to? Nobody knows who my cousin Vinny is. It's just really confusing. And if you have somebody that doesn't know how to navigate all of this, does it send them down the wrong path, or a path that may not be as fruitful, I guess is my question. You know? Maybe that wasn't a good question.
No. Oh, I'm ordering my thoughts, so I'm not incoherent. Your question is one of the most important. Let me state one caveat first, which is one of the things that we have to do better in America is that we make this a very binary choice. You go to college or you go into industry and work. And if you look at countries who do this better than we do, it's not that binary. Switzerland, which is a place I got to spend time late last year, They have the closest thing to, frankly, this continuous higher education loop. People in high school say, look, I want to be an apprentice. And by the way, their economy is built to have people go into jobs from engineering to investment banking through the apprenticeship structure. Or they say, hey, I want to go to a university and get a normal baccalaureate degree. And then they can say at 25, hey, you know what? I want to do the other thing. And they have this tangle and people go back and forth, and it's okay. That is something we in America need to learn from ASAP, because the nature of the economy requires continual upscaling, continual education, and this binary frame that, frankly, even I had. When my parents came here, they said, you go to college, that's it. Or I don't know what you thought we came here for, but you're going to college.
It used to be, my parents would say, if you don't go to college, you're going to be a bum. You're going to be on the side of the street begging for money.
And the real question is, okay, what do you think you want to do? What is the quickest path to get you there now? And if you change your mind, because you likely will, here's how you get back. And so we should be learning from the Switzerlands, the Austrias, who make this a tangle. So that's number one. I think number two, this is something that I spent a lot of time on in the administration. The clearest way to tell me what is a quality credential, what's good or bad, is tell me what happens to the people who went through them. Bluntly. Did they get a job?
Right.
Did they get a job in what they studied in? If you can give me something that's more longitudinal, have they increased salary going forward? Tell me those basic outcomes. Right now in America, we can't at scale. Now, one of the things that, and I'll tell you a couple of projects that tell you what we worked on at the Department of Labor. You have a number of states like Indiana who works with Ivy Tech, which is their community college, to use income tax records from the state level to say, here are all the people who went through X certificate. Here's their records from tax. And I can give you in aggregate what happened to those people. Did they get a job? How much were they paid? So on and so forth. Now, there are limits to that data because if someone moves out of state or someone's self-employed, there are limits, but it tells me something. If you think about the college scorecard, which is a version of this, there are other efforts called EQUOS, which is from the Burning Glass Institute, where I'm spending time currently, which is basically looking at how can I, along a number of metrics, say what happens to the people who went through certain credentials. That's how I have to get to. And for us, what we were trying to get to at Labor, which I led on for 2 years, was the creation, and is one of our priority data projects, of a workforce scorecard. To be able to say, for all the things that we funded, let me tell you to aggregate what happens to those people. It is not full, it's not complete, but it can tell me something. Because I'll tell you right now, if you were to have that data for every program, you would see very quickly some programs that didn't deliver any value that people should stay away from. And you would see some that consistently actually delivered. Still way more to learn, but that's a place to start. What happened?
It's a place to start, but we can't stop there.
Correct.
It does deliver those broad strokes to look at income levels when people graduate, how persistent their employment has been, because as we also encountered in HBCU land, there is very often a natural bias, either conscious or unconscious, at the moment of recruiting.
Correct.
Retention. Once our young people get to a place, they've been that very aggressive recruiting effort that was headed by Jamie Dimon. Yes, sometimes our students would get to these places, and after 18 months or 2 years, they felt as if there were no place for them to go.
Yikes.
So what happens inside of the labor force, that's a response. We have a responsibility in higher ed. I get that. Absolutely agree. But there's also a responsibility for those who are executives in the labor force to make sure that there is that constant support and development.
I'm so glad you said this. I worked for Marty Walsh, who was the prior mayor of Boston, and Julie Sue for 2.5 years. And if you listen to them, you hear them talk about people being in jobs, or you hear about them being in good jobs, quality jobs. And we define along 5 different metrics. Some of them are squishier than others because the data is not quite there. We looked at wages, living wages. We looked at access to benefits, retirement, healthcare, things like that. For us, we were the Department of Labor, the freedom to organize, the freedom to be free from discrimination. But we would also look at advancement and access to training, meaning And this is actually, and if you want to look at the American Opportunity Index from the Burning Glass Institute, it talks about this. It measures this. When someone gets in a firm, what is their probability of being able to move up within the firm if they so choose? And then what does that look like, frankly, across metrics of gender, race, ethnicity, income levels? So when we think about quality jobs, and this is why I say higher ed, even though it's not their responsibility, for the interest of their students, need to figure out how we push and how we help us. In some ways, I've met a lot of companies who want to do the right thing because it's a smart thing for their business. I need to fill these jobs, and I will look anywhere. It's why you're seeing companies for the first time really en masse saying, we will hire people who have been incarcerated. Attention. 20 years ago, they would not be willing to do that. But because I don't have anywhere else to look, or so they believe, they really do it, but they don't quite know how. And so this is where I think higher ed can be a huge partner. I'll use one example. There was a company that I worked with when I was at Labor, and they had a lot of jobs to fill. They had 10,000 sub-baccalaureate jobs to fill, meaning you did not need a college degree for these jobs. They needed them by 2025. They invested a lot of time, probably 4 years, tens of millions of dollars into a partnership with a community college system in the Southeast. They needed 10,000 of these jobs filled. I would have you guess on how many they actually filled.
Half.
You said half?
About a third.
16. Not because they
want to happen. It feels like you can do better than that without trying.
Not because they were dumb, not because they didn't want to. They did not know how to partner, to recruit. And this community college system was in a part of the country that looks like the country. Let me say it like that. And so this is where I think higher ed and all these other parts where they need some help, because it's in everyone's interest. The company wants to make money, which they mean that they need people to work the jobs. Higher ed, obviously, because of how they're compensated and paid and their mission. Intermediaries, nonprofits, workforce boards. But one of the things that I saw from my perch on the federal level was a lack of coordination and a lack of understanding of everyone's incentives to make those partnerships work. And I saw partnerships like this fail over and over again. Not because people didn't want to make it work, but because they literally didn't know how. And so that's
discipline
I've taken with me.
Yes, it was so interesting. When I first arrived at Spelman, we would have college fairs, career fairs, and I'm sure you're familiar with those.
Very familiar.
Where all these companies and organizations would show up on a college campus, and the students would kind of go from booth to booth to booth to booth to table to table to table, right? And they were highly ineffective. They would be the kinds of events that, in my view, would yield the 16 people. We completely restructured our relationship with companies we hired a director of corporate partnerships and partnered her with our career development. And they would literally work with highly interested companies to figure out what's the right way for your industry, for your sector, for your particular company to interface with our college. And then, and when I say that, if you're a finance place, well, maybe we ought to really connect you with our economics department, because that's where all the students who gravitate towards finance go. If you're a high-tech company, no, maybe it's computer science and the math and the physics department, So in fact, we made much more fine-tuned observations about how to do the matchmaking between the company and that interface with the college. And it's time-consuming and it takes a lot of follow-up, but it works.
This is one thing that I'll say, and you invoked Freeman Hrabowski's name, again, who is a legend in Maryland and beyond, but he made a very clear observation early on when he got to UMBC. He looked and he said, what part of higher education is really, really good at recruiting and getting people placed? And there's one place that's actually really, really good. It's the athletic department. And if you look at Division I athletics, take the sports off. It is an unbelievable recruiting machine.
That's right.
To the precision way they go after talent, recruit them to their places. If they want to go on to the league or to a league or somewhere else, they're really good at it. And I've heard him say this, we sought out to recruit STEM talent of color the way that Division I's recruit athletes. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about that in a scaled way, in a macro way, how do we do that for, frankly, the entire economy? This is a place where now you begin to, number one, have much different results as you're describing. And then also, that's the type of service that I can see a company saying, we will invest in. Because that's the thing. Clearly, we're not getting it, otherwise we would not be here talking to you. But I was just listening to, I've been following Deion Sanders and all his work at CU Boulder. And he's like, look, I'm going to Mama's house, and I'm going to talk to Mom. And the pitch that he's making is not only will you come to CU and you're going to help us win the title. You want to go to the league? That's what you want to do? Hey, we're going to do that. You want to go to finance? I'm going to help you do that. Whatever your future is, you will leave us better than you came.
Yes.
And I think we have institutions that are doing that, but particularly for folks who are coming from those underserved communities, how do we make that pitch explicitly and have a really clear path to help people do that? And that path can change. I talk to undergrads all the time, and I say, look, you'll have a plan on day one like I did. I was going to be a doctor, like every Nigerian immigrant kid. And then
a doctor or lawyer, choose one.
Lawyer wasn't even on the.
Wasn't even on it.
My parents thought that was like being an actor. They were like, look, but I did. But then I remember taking my first biology class, and on the first test I got a 17, and I didn't realize it was out of 100. And I said, this might not be for me.
Outrageous.
And so, I think taking the approach, man, that you've talked about to everything is really powerful, and that's how you begin to solve a bunch of these problems. And again, nothing I came up with. Freeman came up with this 30 years ago, and he did it flawlessly.
Well, let me tell you, when I was a dean for 23 years at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. And when I came there, 90% of the student body population was white. It was a absolutely homogeneous school, and 98% of the faculty was white. Totally homogeneous community. We started something and I used that sports metaphor. I said, look, if colleges and universities can go out and start looking for talent in middle school and high school to identify them, we can do the same thing in the arts. We identified the top 100 schools and community centers that did arts education. We first started going out to them, then we started inviting their faculties into our school. I will tell you, in a matter of just a few years, we completely changed the complexion of that school. It is not brain surgery, but it does take a committed, disciplined, focused, consistent effort over time.
Absolutely.
I love that. Well, I have to, what my job here at the EdUp Experience of Elvin and I is to make magic happen. And that magic is putting together people like you two where I could just sit back and just maybe interject here and there. And you guys had a great conversation, which is why this is so important. And your perspectives are so different, but so similar in many ways. And Chike, we always ask our guests 2 questions to end every episode. First of all, if there's anything else you want to say about your work at Labor or any upcoming work. So it's your soapbox moment. It's not really a question. It's an open mic moment, if you will. And then 2, you got to tell us what the future of higher education holds for us.
For me personally, as I said, I stepped away just recently from the administration. Would do it 10 times over, and don't quite know what I'll do when I grow up. But right now, I'm really honored to spend a piece of my time with the Burning Glass Institute, which is an amazing thinking do tank. Which is
I think I interviewed their CEO in a month.
Yeah, who is an amazing work. And then also with the Burn Center for Social Change at Northeastern University, where I'll be working on a number of things around innovation in public service, as well as some of these future of work questions. I think what I do know about what's next for me is that I'm focused on the rest of my career, and as long as I can do it on the future of work, and I like to say this a lot, that includes everyone. And or as I also like to say it, how do we create an economy that not only makes us prosperous, but also makes us proud? In terms of what higher education, I think, has in its future, I think as we tackle a number of these questions, whether it be extinction level events like climate change or pandemics, whether it is how we overcome differences in our societies and in our worlds between people, whether it's how we make sure there is an economy that has a place for everyone. Higher education has a key role in each of those. And so I think the best higher education institutions are not going to cloister themselves in an ivory tower. They're going to see the biggest challenges in our society, and they're going to run towards them. They are going to be putting their best minds towards solving the next vaccine, or figuring out how we pull carbon out of the air. They're going to be the best place to convene people so that we can talk through our differences and not resort to, frankly, violence and things like that. They're going to be thinking through the next business models that are going to create more jobs, more opportunities for more people in more places. And so what I'm most excited about is seeing those institutions who are going to run towards the problems, not run away. And if any of them want any help, I'm happy to offer the little bit that I can. But that's what I see in higher education's future if America and the world is going to be successful.
I like your style, dude.
It is with great pleasure that I was able to be here with the both of you. Mary, I have to ask you how you feel about your first co-hosting gig here on the EdUp Experience.
Oh, this has been a blast. I mean, look who the guest was.
I'm telling you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, she is my guest host. No, she is your guest host. She is Dr. Mary Schmidt-Campbell, President Emerita from Spelman College, and she's in Big Sky, Montana, taking on lots of projects. So give her a call, apparently, in her retirement. I give you a true innovator himself. How he's worked at so many places and he looks like he's 23 years old, I don't know. But I wish I had that superpower, I promise you. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest, your guest, his name is Chike Aguh. He is the former Chief Innovation Officer at the U.S. Department of Labor, and he's going to be on your radar very, very soon. I guarantee it. Chike, how'd you enjoy your experience here with me and Mary?
Absolutely amazing. Bring me back whenever you have time.
Oh, I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just EdUp'd. It's time to level up. The beginning of a new era in higher education begins with you. Order your copy of Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education by Kate Colbert, Dr. Joseph Lucio, with contributions by Elvin Freitas. It's higher education's must-read book of 2022. Discover how you can seize the moment to change higher education forever. Commencement, The Beginning of a New Era in Higher Education, now available on Amazon. For bulk orders, contact Kate, Joe, or Elvin.